We have only one goal regarding language, to provide the same starting conditions for all children, no matter where they live in Russia. We're talking about Tatarstan now, which I love and where I have many friends. But Tatars live not only in Tatarstan, about half of them live in other Russian regions, and all of them must have equal starting conditions.
That was Vladimir Putin at his annual press conference. Critics of the Russian president accuse him of many things. And one of those is oppressing ethnic minorities in Russia, especially Tatars. Moscow's relations with Russia's Tatar community have been strained for quite some time. But things seem to be getting worse. Last year, local governments were pressured into abolishing local language courses in the ethnic republics. It was a move that led to protests, but Putin stands by the decision, saying it's unacceptable to force a man to learn a language that's not his own. So, is Moscow imposing its own identity onto ethnic minorities? Well, to get more on this, I'm joined now from the Georgian capital, Tbilisi, by Neil Hauer. He's a security analyst focused on Russia and the Caucasus. Neil, good to talk to you again on the Newsmakers. In general, does Russia have a problem with the Republic of Tatarstan?
Tatarstan is a very difficult issue for Russia in that it was after Chechnya in the 1990s, the republic that Russia had the most problems with. Chechnya went the more absolute and the more extreme course of declaring independence. And Russia, of course, as we know, had to enter the two wars there to reclaim it. And Tatarstan came close. It had a referendum on its sovereignty, and it stopped short of declaring independence, but it used the results of this referendum to negotiate a privileged position with its relation with Moscow in the center that other republics don't have. And because of this, Vladimir Putin has always viewed it as a difficult issue, and now he's finally moving to bring it further back under central control.
And imposing more of a Russian ethnic and linguistic identity. Are we going to see problems emerge from that? Are we going to see a stronger ethnic Tatar identity in response to that?
I think almost definitely. This is actually part of a broader trend that's been happening across Russia in the last several years. Most of a great number of the national minority languages, possibly a majority of them, have been sort of declining on their own due to structural factors. But in the last 2 years here, there's been this real pushback against the Tatar language in Tatarstan, the North Caucasian languages, including Chechen, and even in other places in the North Caucasus where it hasn't happened before. North Ossetia, there's been a reduction in teaching hours for the national language there too. So in all these places, I think it's definitely likely to have the opposite effect of rallying people around the flag. And when they try and do it so overtly to suppress the nationality, it tends to have the opposite cause, and it blows back and makes it into a real issue that people are now talking about openly.
Well, and where these guys differ, I guess, from the limited reading that I did on this, is that they have money, right? So they're a generally relatively prosperous region. So tell me how that factors into the dynamic and why Moscow maybe has to be cautious about how it treats Tatarstan.
Right, you're right about that. Tatarstan's an extremely different case just because of its position and its size and its relative wealth vis-a-vis the North Caucasus, whereas in the North Caucasus, the republics there are largely reliant to a huge extent on transfers from the federal center in Moscow. Tatarstan is actually a net contributor to the budget. Tatarstan has huge oil reserves. It's located not very far. The capital, Kazan, is one of the largest cities in Russia. It's located only a couple hundred kilometers from Moscow. It's much more centrally located and closer to the Russian heartland itself than the North Caucasus. And because of this, it gives them a lot more power vis-a-vis the Kremlin in their negotiating position.
And for those who make the connection between Russia clamping down on the Republic of Tatarstan and Russia's annexation of Crimea and gobbling it up from Ukraine as a sort of broader policy, is that connection relevant? Does it have a sense of continuity, or are they two separate things?
I think that there's not a huge comparison to be made between the two, but of course there is the salient issue of the Crimean Tatars in Crimea, who have been consistently harassed and oppressed over the last several years, and there's continuing very regular arrests of activists and clampdowns on Crimean Tatar language abilities and opportunities to learn the language and develop it. And well, I'm not sure that how big of an impact these have on Tatarstan itself. I mean, they're still their ethnic kin, And I think the people there view it as something that's setting an ominous precedent for Tatarstan itself, and that Moscow is probably feeling feeling a little more bold now that it's had success and been relatively unopposed in Crimea with these policies against the Tatars there. And now they're swinging the policies back around to the homeland in Tatarstan itself.
Yeah, all things considered, my final question to you, this is a former empire. Is it trying to recreate itself as a more homogeneous entity?
I mean, it's an interesting question, and it certainly seems like that's part of it. I mean, in the past, in the imperial age, Russia didn't really have a unifying national ideology, as it was just an empire, and countries did not tend to back then. But of course, under the Soviet Union, you had the idea of the socialist brotherhood and communism, the guiding ideology. And underneath that, you had this concept of the Bratstvo Naroda, the brotherhood of peoples. But the thing that really went over the top of all of it was communism. And since the collapse of the Soviet Union, there hasn't been that. The only similar identity they found to fill the void has been Russian nationalism. And of course, having national minorities clashes with this. So I think they're actually making a bigger or a more overt attempt to subvert ethnic nationalities and ethnic minorities in the present day than they have in the past.
Okay, Neil Hauer, always good to pick your brain. Thanks for joining us once again on the Newsmakers.